Okay, well, today we are talking to Dr. Harvey Karp and his daughter Lexi about all things newborn sleep. This is such a huge topic. It's something that everyone who is expecting a baby or has a new baby or has had a newborn in their home can understand sleep and sleep deprivation as being such huge parts of life and also struggles. So we're going to launch into that. Dr. Karp is also the creator of Snoo. If you are a new parent or a soon to be parent, I'm sure you've heard of Snoo and all the amazing things that Snoo has to offer with baby sleep. So we're going to get into all of that, and also whether or not a sleep schedule is something to pay attention to or to just ignore, like my mom always says. Well, I'm so glad to have you both talking because my mom and I have just come out of spending so much time talking about multi-generational parenting. And I have to say, the biggest thing that has come up that is a disconnect or an issue with grandparents and their children becoming parents is sleep. So I'm really excited to just dive into it with two different generations of sleep expertise. But wondering if you guys are on the same page about sleep since you're like sleep gods with
We
everyone.
are, I think, right? We'll find out.
Yeah, we definitely recommend it. Yes. But so it's so interesting saying multi-generational parenting because as if there's any other type. And it's so weird because today it's like a luxury. It's like so many people don't have multi-generational parenting, and yet that is the only way human beings ever survived. So it's kind of
Mm.
interesting that that's the rarity now, and the normal thing is having one or two parents.
Yeah, I moved to LA recently because I had a baby in New York and I was like, I need my parents. I can't do it anymore.
I mean, I love that. And I love the fact that obviously you guys are close. And Dr. Karp, why don't we talk just to intro? I love that I've told everybody today I'm interviewing the person who is a sleep god and also created the snoo, which is like everyone who is in the world of having babies, pregnant, wanting to have babies, knowing anybody who has a baby knows the snoo, and also, of course, the whole subject of sleep or lack thereof.
And who saw you when you were a little baby? Because you were coming to my
I know.
practice. I mean, our office. Yeah, yeah,
I know. I know. So it's, I mean, perfect that this has we've come to reunite in this
yeah.
platform. But let's go back to just how the snoo even came to be, and also just like the subject of sleep became such an important thing for you to talk about.
Yeah, so it's the number one pain point. Ask any parent, what's the hardest thing about having a baby? And they'll go sleep. And when you have a baby, the first question you're asked, I mean, when they're born, it's like, boy or girl, what's their name? But as soon as you're home, right, it's like, how's the baby sleeping? Wink, wink, like, you're going to now give, oh my God, it's terrible. And that's the hard part. But the serious part is that that exhaustion leads to a lot of very unfortunate things: unsafe sleeping and infant death and postpartum depression and child abuse and all sorts of dark tunnels that it goes into when you're sleep deprived. Because you know what? And most people are shocked when they hear this, but we train Navy SEALs to endure torture by putting them through chronic sleep deprivation with the sound of crying babies over loudspeakers.
Totally. I mean, it is so true that it's such a subject, and it almost feels that when you talk about sleep as a new parent, that it's kind of like a badge of honor when people are talking about, I'm so exhausted, I haven't slept, I've been up every hour, hour and a half, or I'm, pumping, I'm breastfeeding, the baby won't sleep. It's like such a big conversation, but it's actually so much more important than that, as you mentioned, with parents' mental health, with postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety has become a
Yeah.
huge subject, and we've talked about all of these things. But when it comes to sleep, um, you know, as I mentioned, like it seems like every new parent is like, oh, I have to go through this sleep deprivation, and your whole thing is that you don't.
Right. Well, and this is the thing, as pediatricians, we tell parents, babies are going to wake up a lot, they're going to cry a lot. You got to wait 5 or 6 months and suck it up and deal with it, and then it's going to get better. But when people are really struggling and falling apart and they come to us, we whisper to them, there is a secret thing you can do that will immediately have your baby cry less and sleep more. Drive them all night in the car.
That's what my mom used to do.
And some people even drive on bumpy back roads because the baby, it's only when they're bouncing around that it works. So the issue is if people are sleep deprived and babies are waking up a lot, and there's a magic way to help them, and if you don't get that sleep, it's leading to all sorts of bad things. Why not have a way to give babies, in essence, what we're doing? It's this fourth trimester idea that the babies are born 3 or 4 months before they're really ready for the world. Not that I've talked the women into trying that. It's just a theory. But honestly, the babies aren't quite ready for the world. And so when you hold them and rock them a lot, that's really what works the best. And that's kind of how we ended up creating Snoo as a way to give babies that richness, and not just to help the parents sleep. But it turns out that ask 1,000 babies, would you like to be by yourself in the dark on your back for 14 hours a night? Or held and rocked and shushed? And we know the babies would say the latter. And now studies are going on looking at brain development of children. When you hold and rock a child, I mean, if you feed them and you never pick them up, they're not going to grow normally. If you pick them up and hold them for 1 hour, that's better than nothing. 2 hours is better than one. Well, why not 14 hours of holding and rocking through the night? That is literally a nurturing their nervous system while they're sleeping and while you're getting the rest so you can be a good mom or dad the next day.
What has been the reaction since creating the Snoo? And obviously, when Lexi came to my house to set up the Snoo, a family friend got it for me right when she found out that I was pregnant. It was like the first thing that arrived at my doorstep. And it also came with all of your books, with a variety of different mattress covers, of swaddles, of so much different kinds of gear. But what has been the big response that you've heard from creating something that is on everyone's baby registry from the moment you find out that you're pregnant, and then used throughout several pregnancies or babies and even friends? Is this this gift that everybody wants? But what has been the big kind of feedback that you've gotten from people?
You're too humble and nice, so I have to say this part for you, and then you pick your idea. But I hear people say to him on a daily basis, "You saved my life. You saved my marriage." Like, these are big statements and compliments people are giving him, and it's true. I mean, probably your experience as well. When you're tired and you're scared and you're responsible for a tiny little life, it's a lot of pressure, especially without, learning. This generation is kind of giving birth without having held a baby before. So I'm included. I've used it myself. I feel the same way. But I wonder, if you feel comfortable saying that. But people every day say that you changed their lives.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing about this is when you're trying to do something that's so fundamentally a change, you get all sorts of comments. So for the most part, I think people really are happy and they're loving it. But listen, I love skepticism as well. And so, like, one of the biggest questions people ask us is, well, doesn't this make a baby get addicted to being held and rocked and shushed? And the answer is, actually, they're born addicted to it. In the womb, the sound is louder than a vacuum cleaner, 24/7. That's kind of the sound they're hearing. And they're held 24/7 and they're rocked. Every time you breathe, you're pressing your diaphragm against the top of the uterus. So suddenly being born, why should you just rip the Band-Aid off and suddenly say, tough love, baby, you got to go 14 hours on your own? By 6 months of age, the brain has doubled in size. So the baby is much better able to regulate their own sleep. And so they don't need the help of motion. They don't need the help of swaddling. Still like to use sound to help babies sleep, really for many years, and even a lot of adults use white noise for sleeping. But it's been interesting because people are, skeptical at first about something that's so new. But now even the physicians are recommending it. It's won more awards than any baby product ever. It's in the Smithsonian Institution, if you can believe that.
Wow.
So
I mean,
that's
it
really.
feels like it feels like it should be, right? I mean, I feel like it's, especially for my age group, I feel like it is something that's kind of a staple in everyone's whether it's your first pregnancy, second pregnancy, of something that is on your baby
Yeah.
registry that you want to be getting to be better prepared as a parent. And then also even something that you're talking to friends about who, I have so many friends who you see with a newborn or even, a 2-3 month old that are exhausted, and you can see how the lack of sleep really does impact people's mental health. And then, for me, I was in the thick of the pandemic, also trying to navigate the sleep part of it, as well as the isolation and the anxiety and the fear factors of
Super.
everything going on. So, it's a lot for a lot of people, and to be able to have something like this to help you with the big adjustment of sleep is huge.
And it sleep trains the baby as well. So one of the things when you ask about how people respond to it, a lot of people say, well, I don't want to have to need that, or let me do it on my own first, as if that's a badge of honor, like you were saying about being awake for so long. But um, but the more, if you can get an extra hour or two of sleep at night, you're going to be a happier parent, a better parent. You're going to improve your milk supply, and the baby is going to be happier because they got a longer extended amount of rest. Because what we see is immediately babies get an hour more sleep. But what's really interesting, and we didn't anticipate this, was a complete surprise. By 3 months of age, a normal 3 month old would give you about a 5 hour stretch of unbroken sleep. In Snoo, it's almost 7 hours. And for some babies, even 8 and 9 hours. That was never even thought possible before. And so by improving the baby's ability to sleep, it allows the parents to feel better. And our goal with this is not to be like this bougie baby bed that you got to spend a lot of money on. Our goal is that everyone gets it for free. So thousands of people get a free Snoo now from their employer. So JP Morgan Chase and Snapchat and Under Armour and Dunkin' Donuts and lots of companies give it as a benefit. And we're hoping over the years, more and more companies, will be able to do that, where anyone who wants their company to do it, should contact us. And then ultimately insurance companies and even Medicaid. So we're working now with public health programs, inner city programs, teen parenting programs, et cetera, to really provide this on a broad scale.
And that's actually one thing that I think is so important, because the people who need SNOO most often can't get it. And so these corporate programs, you can be a janitor, you can be a factory line worker. We have people in those positions getting free SNOOs from their employers. So it feels so meaningful that, while we're still talking to these other kind of government entities that move a little slower, we're able to much more quickly get to people who need the help.
I think that that's such a big part of it, because there is so much baby gear that people say, oh, you need to get this, you need to get that, you need to. So this idea, and I have a lot of my friends who are done having kids who gift their Snoo to people, because it is, for some people it's out of reach financially for people. So the help of being able to give it as a gift, or also give it to a friend or a sibling who's having a baby, to just overall be able to reap the benefits of having some sleep. And then also to kind of take the pressure off of, or the worry that so many parents feel when bringing home a newborn with no instruction manual is, what's going to happen if I fall asleep? Is my baby going to be okay? I mean, the amount of times I would go in as a new mom and just even in the hospital, make sure that your baby's breathing, that they're, didn't roll over, that everything is okay when you're just in the hospital, and then you go home and it's a totally different environment. Can you talk about that anxiety and why that was also important to you to incorporate not only the sleep element, but also being mindful of SIDS when doing this?
Yeah, actually, that's really how it all started. Was I was giving a lecture saying 3,500 babies die, healthy babies die every year in the United States when they roll to an unsafe position or they're brought into their parents' bed. And I said, if another country were killing 3,500 of our babies every year, we would go to war. So why aren't we doing more? And then I spoke to my wife, Nina, that night, and I said, this should be a solvable problem. And so we ended up, it took, 10 years to design it and figure it out and do all the prototypes and stuff like that. It was a lengthy process. However, that was a big motivator. And I'm really proud to say that SNOO is the only FDA de novo authorized a baby bed that secures babies on the back. So when I was a little kid, people drove their cars and had the baby on the front seat right next to them. And they said, don't
Mhm.
worry. I mean, if I have to stop, I'll just put my arm out there and keep the baby. Now, of course, you'd be arrested for child endangerment or something like that.
Right.
Um, Same thing for sleep, I believe, because now we secure kids in car seats, we secure them in a high chair, we secure them in a swing, we secure them in a bouncer seat, we secure them in a stroller. But the number one place babies get into problems is in their own beds, and we put them there for 12 or 14 hours a night completely without control, where they could roll over at any minute. So in a few years, everyone's going to secure their babies just the way we do it in car seats. So that was a big factor. Interestingly, you were talking about in the hospital, and Snoo is now used in about 150, 160 hospitals. And each bed has been shown to reduce nurse labor 4 to 5 hours per day by reducing crying and improving sleep. So we use it for babies after surgery and babies who are exposed to opioids and premature babies. So this has really been exciting as we're expanding the access to this for the little babies who need it in the hospital, as well as for the parents at home.
But one thing you said that struck me was that worry. And I don't know if you remember this, but I called my parents crying one night from New York. Um, and I had the snoo like right next to my face, like next to our bed. And I still did that "Are you alive? Are you alive?" thing. I don't know if it's because I know too much due to our line of work, but I think no matter what, there are these postpartum anxieties that you have, even if you wouldn't think of yourself as somebody who has like anxiety in general. And I was like, I can't do this. That sentence, "sleep when the baby sleeps," like drives me crazy because I couldn't, or I was worried and my brain would race. And I remember calling them crying and I was like, "How did you do this without Snoo?" And my mom said, "We didn't. We just didn't go to sleep. We put, a like mirror in front of you to see if your breath would fog the glass," and like all these wild stories. And I thought, we're so lucky to have this. But if I'm already a little nervous with Snoo, I think I wouldn't have survived without it because I was so freaked out.
For sure. I mean, it's like, there's so many different things to think about as a new parent, and then you come home and that's another huge part is just the adjustment of routine, but also the adjustment of, how's your mental state? Are you getting any sleep? Are you okay? It's always, I feel like between close friends, it's always the question of, are you
Yeah.
okay?
With like the
Is
head nod,
everything
the real, tell me the
so?
truth.
Yeah.
Yeah,
When you
I
give
know.
birth in a
It's always,
hospital,
how are you really doing?
But Catherine, I mean, you're smart. You've got a lot of friends. You're educated, stuff like that. And then with your having a new baby, were you shocked? Did you feel like, why didn't anyone tell me it was going to be like this? Were you surprised at how hard it was, or did you kind of roll with it?
I mean, I have to say that I'm 8 years older than my youngest brother. So I remember my mom being up a lot. And I remember just the amount of time my mom spent pumping and breastfeeding. And of course, if you're getting up at night to breastfeed or, versus if someone's bottle feeding, it's a very different situation sleep wise because there's a lot of care that goes into that. I think honestly, I was more surprised at when my daughters, both of my girls, started sleeping more, that I was still having to get up because I was breastfeeding. And so I was like, this doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
Why am I still not getting enough sleep? But I think, I was probably humbled by the amount of times I was getting up. And also, I think that I was very focused on so many other anxieties of having my first baby in a pandemic in isolation
Oh my God, yeah.
that the sleep component for me didn't feel like the worst thing in the world compared to everything else that was going on. So I'm also, I also always say that, especially in the beginning, I feel like the gift of having a partner that is helpful and also can understand and be mindful of the person's, the mother's mental health is such a gift, and it's so important. And it's one of the things actually that, from reading your books and also being aware of the impact that the lack of sleep has on parents' mental health, it's always something that now moving forward, I always check in with the husband or the partner
Smart.
just to get a good gauge, especially when people kind of go into their newborn cocoon bubble
Mhm.
and you don't have eyes on people, like how are the people actually doing? Because it's, postpartum depression is something that we talk about so openly now, but it's something that there is a stigma still associated with, and people don't talk about it. And
Sure.
again, you think it's kind of this normal thing. Oh, I'm not going to sleep in the beginning. And, the awareness of how much that impacts your mental health
Yeah.
is such a big
And you
conversation
know
to
what
continue to
people
have.
also misunderstand? They hear the term postpartum depression, and I think it's boohoo depression. Just can't get out of bed. And of course, sometimes it's that, but oftentimes it's an anxious depression, where you're not crying all the time, but your mind won't stop racing. You can't go to sleep when your baby goes to sleep. You have intrusive thoughts like, this knife in my hand could suddenly fall and it could hit my baby, or strange things
Right.
start happening. And so it's important for people to understand that it isn't just a sadness kind of a depression. A lot of times it's an anxious or even an obsessive kind of a brain change.
I want to talk a little bit about what I was saying in the beginning of this interview, which was that it seems that all of my friends who really rely heavily on their parents and, especially for my girlfriends, rely heavily on their moms for help with childcare, calling their parents for advice. Lexi talked about, calling you and your wife for advice when she had her baby. And the biggest thing that, my mom is amazing. She's the best mom. She's, just like
Uber competent, yeah.
cool as a cool as a cucumber
Mm.
with the kids. And I always call her for advice on everything. But the one thing I remember when I would start coming around with the babies was always like, what is this sleep schedule? What is this emphasis that everybody's putting on sleep? This was not a thing when, when I had you kids, nobody was talking about sleep the way people are talking about sleep now. Is that something that you two noticed in your own dynamic and your own relationship? Is like, was there any sort of disconnect around the subject of sleep, or are you guys so on the
I
same
mean,
page?
I'm like early indoctrinated, like driving to school. I went to school really young, so I'm very into all this red shirting that's a part of the pop cultural norm right now because I was still 16 the beginning of senior year. So he had to drive me to school every day for a long time. And so
Yeah.
I would hear like calling back. I feel like I'm a pediatrician. I'm like, what color is your snot? What color is your poop?
Oh, yeah.
But so
Right.
listening to all of that, I just learned. So I didn't think about it. And as someone who's like very much an alpha, I was really surprised at being laid back. I think it was maybe because I had so much information, listening, being around, knowing the books. We had the 20-year anniversary, oh my God, 2 years ago of the happiest baby on the block.
Three.
So
Yeah.
like 3 years ago. I'm still
Wow.
on pandemic time. But so I think that it was so bizarre because like you've evolved with the patients, right? Like he's seen over 10,000 babies. Most of my friends in school used to joke like, "Your dad seen me naked." And so I think maybe like a traditional grandparent would be so far removed, like 40 years, 30 years, whatever later, they might be more shell shocked by some of the cultural norms, but you're the person like moving the zeitgeist. And like, I think I did that with you and now we work together. So, we've
Yeah,
always
so we
been.
were pretty much joined at the hip. I think one of the things that's happening though is as more parents didn't have your experience, Catherine, of seeing a younger brother or sister, they're kind of
Mhm.
trying to figure it out the way they figure it out everything else, which is intellectually. They go to Google University and they try to gather the information and make the best decisions. And it's a very intellectual process. And part of that is now that we can measure everything, each time your heartbeat and your breathing and whatever, your sleep, people are starting to measure everything about babies. And so they're very quantified and like, this has to be like this and this much sleep and this many, wake windows should be no longer than this. And everybody's kind of over intellectualized it. And I think that that's just part of our culture right now. And part of being a pediatrician is to try to say, to the degree that you can, I mean, it's great for you to pay attention to the clock, but before, a couple of hundred years ago, no one had a clock and no babies look at a clock. And, it's, you can learn how to read your baby's cues to be able to be guided instead of worrying about being exactly on a schedule, things like that. So I
But
think it's
that's
kind of,
their
kind of part
MO.
of the culture.
Like in the first book, he says, the best kind of parenting advice or bumper sticker if I could give to a parent would be like, a new parent would be like, be flexible or die. And like, it sounds crazy and reductionist, but it is like the most profound, even if it's obvious thing. And I would call him, for example, like in New York City, you know, in like Soho in these warehouses, you have these heating, you can't control your own heat. And I'd call him and be like, I don't know what the right temperature is. What's the tog? What's this? What's that? And he's like, touch her face. Is she red? Is she sweating? And you would always be very rational and kind of like nonchalant about it. And I think that we need that sanity in face of all this information overload and datafying everything.
Oh. And for toddlers as well. A lot of people are like reading the book and it should be exactly this way or that way because they don't know, they haven't had that experience. That's a whole other can of worms in terms of talking about gentle parenting and what does that mean and how do you raise a child who's respectful, but we're respecting them, but they learn discipline. These are complex issues that you were supposed to learn automatically on the playground and when you took care of your five other younger brothers and sisters, if you had that many. And people don't have that experience today. So I think that parents are trying to do the best they can. Um, and oftentimes without that extended family help that you're talking about, and trying to learn and that's kind of what's hard for so many people because they feel kind of caught in a kind of a whiplash situation where they're, oh, don't do that, but no, don't do that, and then they don't really know exactly who they're supposed to believe.
When you see patients, if they're pregnant, if they're first-time parents, what, aside from, of course, getting a snoo, what do you tell parents to kind of best prepare them for new parenthood, for the sleep situation, and just the mindset of the change when having a newborn?
Well, first to say that no matter what everyone's told you, it's hard. It is, expect that, expect you're going to be tired, expect that you're going to, even if you're the smartest person in the world. I remember going to one woman's house and she was telling me, this was when I was making the video on Happy's Baby, and she was a lawyer and she had her 3 months off. And she said, I had a stack of novels that I was going to read with all of the time I had taking care of my new baby. And I never opened a single book, so to help people have appropriate expectations. And then to make sure that the partners learn the 5 S's. I mean, not everyone's going to have a snoo anyway, but to learn the techniques of baby calming and baby sleep. And guys are especially, I like to joke, guys are terrible at breastfeeding. But we're very, very good at baby calming, and we're good at our arms are a little longer and stronger, and we can hold that baby and we jiggle them a little bit more and we shush a little bit louder, which is what babies need to be soothed. And so it's also an opportunity to bring the partners into the relationship and make sure that they're empowered to be supportive of the new moms and basically that like they say, every day goes forever, but the year is going to go by in a flash, and try to help ground them in the appreciation of each day. I have to say, one of the things that one mom told me before, I mean, everyone wants to sleep at night and stuff, but she said, the most wonderful time with my baby is at 3 in the morning. Everyone is asleep. The world is asleep, and it's just me and my baby. And I feel it's the most precious time.
Yeah, I always actually felt that. And even when I would wake up, I've always been an early riser, but when I would wake up at 5 in the morning and the sun would be coming up and I would just be by myself with both of the girls, that to me was such a nice quiet time that I definitely was somebody that also enjoyed the the quiet time of that kind of just bonding time. You mentioned the 5 S's, which I want to go through each one because I think it's so important, and especially for people who might not have access to a snoo right away, just to wrap their head around what those 5 S's are to help get better sleep.
Yeah, you bet. So the key concept, like I said, is the fourth trimester. Babies are born 3 or 4 months before they're ready for the world. And what was interesting to me as a doctor is no one ever explained why do we fall asleep in trains and planes and cars, and why do we like to rock in hammocks, and why do we like the sound of the wind? And when people meditate, why do they hum and they move back and forth? It turns out, and this was really what I wrote about in The Happiest Baby on the Block, that babies have a reflex that's kind of an off switch for crying and an on switch for sleep. And it is activated, this reflex is activated by imitating five characteristics of the in utero life. And those are the five S's. So it's swaddling, usually with the arms down, so it's very snug. Hips are loose, but the arms are snug. The second is the side or stomach position. That's not for sleep, that's only for calming crying. The back is the only safe position for sleep, but the back is the worst position for calming crying. So swaddling, the side stomach position, shushing or white noise, swinging or rhythmic motion, and sucking. And interestingly, babies are different. Some babies, you shush them and they calm down in a second. Other babies, you shush, nothing happens. Other babies, you jiggle them and they calm down. Other babies, that doesn't work. And some babies need 3 or 4 simultaneously. And then the swaddling keeps them calm. So once you calm them down and they're swaddled, they're not flailing their arms around and upsetting themselves and waking themselves up. And so those are the things we use in the first 4, 5, 6 months of life. And then by then, the kids develop their own abilities to kind of maintain their calm without those externalities, and they can move forward. But what's wonderful about these things is oftentimes you can calm a crying baby literally in seconds. Literally, they're crying, you wrap them up, you pick them up, you shush them, and within 3 or 4 seconds you can settle them, almost like you're flipping a switch.
Are there any babies or children that you've ever had that none of these things work with?
Um, I would say no. Um, it's kind of like, some are more responsive than others, to be sure, but like as a doctor, how many people have you discovered that when you hit their knee with a little reflex hammer, you can't get their foot to jump out unless they're
Mm.
neurologically, bizarre. So the fact is that this is hardwired into children. How many children
Mhm.
have you seen who don't know how to swallow or suck? I mean, can it happen? I guess, but it's extremely rare.
I feel like that's also such a confidence boost for parents to have this idea that a lot of these things that we think, you know, Google, of course, has its benefits and Instagram has benefits to it, but it also has negative sides. And that is, I even notice with myself just being able to, you go on Instagram and it seems like, especially with, the fourth trimester, everything is terrible. Like there's,
Yeah.
you know, everything is, like this is going to be really bad. This is going to be really bad. And it gives people who are pregnant and getting towards their fourth trimester so much anxiety of almost like, I didn't know that was going to happen. Do I need to be nervous about that? That could be something
Sure.
that all of these kind of stresses and anxieties, come into play, that being able to always remember like people did this so long ago, people
Yes.
still do this without all this overload of information. And I'm sure, I mean, Lexi, how has that been for you? I mean, you have like a built-in guide for everything, but I'm sure that there were still anxieties
Yeah.
or stress factors that came into being a new
Yeah, it's
mom.
interesting. I found, and I watched my friends, do it at the same time. I found the transition into becoming a mother very easy. Mothering is hard, but like I didn't mourn the big loss of my old self. I have a lot of friends who really struggled with the shift in their lifestyle. Maybe it's because we had these pandemic babies and we were sitting at home anyway, so like it was probably a good battle, boot camp. Um, but it certainly, I think that negativity almost maybe is what helped me think it wasn't that bad, because like when you hear all the worst, perhaps you're prepared for the worst. So I think that in some ways it can be positive. What I think is really interesting, and this is another line I stole from you, I don't know if you made this up or not, but that, stop shoulding on yourself, which makes me laugh so hard because there's so much should. I should this, I should this, I should do this sleep schedule, this, I should breastfeed. Like I got COVID, we all got COVID when Lola was 8 weeks old, and my like supply cut in half, and that was not when I had planned to, transition to formula. And so many things happen, and you just feel so much should and pressure. And then, realizing in some ways I look generationally at the sort of stiffness perhaps of previous generations' parenting styles or rules, but then they also didn't have as much insight into each other's lives. So like, you don't really know what they're doing at home, so there's less pressure, whereas we're ingesting this social media and seeing all these other people, and perhaps it's like the clean corner of their house, but you're like, and their hair is clean and their house is clean, like
I
like
know.
I can't do that. So it's a win and a lose, I think. There's good and bad, as you said, but it's certainly something that we've seen together.
But there's a key point I would just want to tag on to that, which is that um, it's really hard raising little kids. And no one raised them in the past, up until 100 years ago, without extended family. Your cousin lived next door. Your kids could run out in the yard. You didn't have to worry about that. And you basically, parents today think they have to be every second, every moment of the day. They naturally should just know how to do this automatically. And like you're saying, their hair is perfect and their house is clean. But there are skills. They're not complex skills, but there are skills that make all the difference between success and failure. And breastfeeding is one of those things. I mean, if you're bottle feeding, that's a lot easier. But breastfeeding, super easy, super natural if it goes well for you. But sometimes it doesn't go well, and you need help. And a little bit of, kind of technique can go a long way in terms of getting you through a difficult time. But the same thing with crying and sleep. And that's where the five S's help, or white noise machine helps, and swaddling blankets help, and snooze can help, and things like that. So it's important for parents to understand that there aren't a lot of skills that they need to learn, but there are some specific skills. Actually, as much as I like the Happiest Baby book, I don't really recommend it to people because I recommend the video. I know not many authors you interview will say that. I mean, it's a fine book, right? It's not a bad book, and it's got cartoons, so that's a good thing.
It's
But
fun.
Yeah.
but people learn these techniques. It's kind of like learning how to tie your shoelaces. You learn it better by watching. And so we made a 30-minute video that teaches that, so that by the end of that, you watch it two or three times, and then you're like the world's best baby calmer. You're literally the magician. And same
Yeah.
thing with feeding babies. You can read a book about breastfeeding, but being demonstrated is much, much more effective.
But the other thing too, with telling people not about your baby book, I found that the early time, like most of my friends hated the newborn phase, and I didn't mind it. I'm not like you. I'm not an early riser. I didn't love the sunrise, but I thought it was fun. I was like even relieved. I was like, oh, this is easy. What's the big deal? And for me, I also called home. I sound like I call home all the time. Maybe this is an only child thing, but I called home on a Saturday afternoon. Lola was like 8 months old, and I was like, had the nicest Buddha baby. And then I don't know, something happened, and I was like, "Is she gonna go back?" And he was like, "No." And so
Oh no.
in what we do at work, we discuss that toddlerhood really starts at 8 months, and that's certainly been a bigger transition. Toddlerhood. I mean, now she's 2.5,
Yeah.
and I feel like that's where we have so much to learn, and kind of skills that aren't as concrete. So like if he can give me skills, five S's or a couple of tools to like get through that infant phase, like that's great. But he has other tools that have helped me in toddlerhood, although I'm not quite mastering that area as much as I did the baby phase.
I mean, it's all gonna be fun. It all you'll like everybody learns it all in their own time. Last question before we wrap, because this is something that comes up so much between parents and their kids as people step into new roles, and especially I feel like today. I mentioned it earlier, but sleep is like the biggest thing people are disconnected about when it comes to grandparents and then new parents. Are sleep schedules a thing to do, or are sleep schedules a thing to ignore?
Both. Both, because I mean, it depends on your life, right? I mean, if you've got
Right.
three kids, you're not going to have any sleep schedules because you're just running, this one's going to soccer practice and that one's got to get in the car, and you just live life. If you have more control in this situation, and especially if you have work responsibilities or things like that, and you're trying to be able to organize your time, then a sleep schedule can be helpful. And so nothing wrong with it, but babies will tell you if they agree with you or not. And so if you say it's the time to sleep and they say it's the time to wake up, they're probably going to win. So that gets to the be flexible or die bumper sticker, which is that it's good to have ideas, it's good to have plans, but don't necessarily feel bad about yourself if it doesn't work out this one time or these other times. And stack the deck in your favor. That's where the right type of swaddling with the arms down and it can be helpful, and the right type of white noise and these other tools that can help and just give you a little bit of an edge so that you can move it in the direction that you want to, because you are suffering from the lack of have a nanny today, you're well off, but you should have 5 nannies, right? All your extended family and everybody like that. So to make up for that lack, it's reasonable to use some of these other little tools.
I love that. My mom will love that response. So thank you so much. Well, thank you both so much for taking time and chatting about this. This is such a huge subject. I could sit and talk for hours about it, because it's something that we're going to have to come back and do a whole separate thing about toddlerhood, since I'm in the thick of that with both of my girls.
Fun.
Tired again. So we'll come back and do that. But thank you both so much. This was so fun, and I loved hearing from both of you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. See you in the hood.
I know. See you in the hood, the Palisades hood. Thank you. Well, thank you so much to Dr. Harvey Karp and his daughter Lexi for talking about multi-generational parenting, the big subject that comes up between generations when it comes to sleep schedules, and also the really important subject of sleep for parents of newborns and the toll that it takes on your mental health. So thank you so much for all the amazing information, and we'll see you next time.